Welcome, Lucy, and thank you for delivering the session for our Decolonising series. I shall hand over the presentation to you. What I would like to ask is for questions, would you like people to pop the questions in the chat, or put up their hands, or wait till the end?
I think wait till the end, but I'm happy to maybe put things in the chat while you think of them, and I'll return to them at the end.
Lovely.
I'm not planning to take, obviously, the whole hour. I've left ample time for a good discussion at the end.
Excellent. Thank you, Lucy. So if you could, if you think of any questions along the way, pop it in the chat and Lucy can address them at the end. So over to you, Lucy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for attending my talk. As already mentioned, my name's Lucy Panesar, and since August last year, I've been a lecturer in higher education at the University of Kent. Before that, as mentioned, I was an educational developer at the University of the Arts London, where I focused on decolonising the arts curriculum in partnership projects with staff, students, and external organisations. It was in 2018 that I worked with two colleagues to curate UAL's first zine on decolonising the arts curriculum, and that received diverse contributions from numerous students and staff. And I contributed a piece that I'd written myself entitled Confessions of a Colonial Lecturer. And it's in this piece that I reflect on the colonial Eurocentric biases of the art history curriculum that I taught for years as a lecturer. And I reflect also on my own place in British colonial history as the offspring of a white British mother and a Kenyan-born Punjabi father who migrated to the UK as a subject of the British Empire. The coloniality of my heritage and the curriculum I was teaching were things I were previously unaware of before completing an MA in education. And it was this new awareness that prompted me to learn more about coloniality and to evolve my practice, moving from teaching students to teaching teachers and taking opportunities where I can to promote and facilitate decolonising praxis. Although I have noticed that the agenda of decolonisation is often critiqued into paralysis, sidelined, or completely avoided, as has been discussed in previous sessions in this lecture series so far. Thus, my provocation leads up to the notion of making decolonising praxis unavoidable for institutions and its people. And I'll start by explaining what position I'm in now and the opportunities I'm currently presented with. So as mentioned, it's since August last year that I've been employed at the University of Kent to teach teachers on the postgraduate certificate in higher education and the associate fellowship scheme, and to also mentor colleagues on the HEA fellowship programme. A huge number of staff go through these programmes on an annual basis. And I have direct responsibility for the curriculum of two modules that I convene. That's the Introduction to Learning Teaching in the Academic Environment and the Inclusive University. And I also help to develop the curriculum for the module entitled Contextualising Higher Education, Teaching and Learning, which is convened by my superior, Professor Kathleen Quinlan. This responsibility of convening a module comes with power, to reverse the famous Spider-Man quote, and opportunities to enact decolonising praxis, as I see it, in relation to the standards and criteria that are enshrined within these programmes, namely the UK professional standards. These programmes are aligned to and that participants need to demonstrate in their submissions and teaching observations in order to pass. The UK professional standards consist of areas of activity, core knowledge and professional values. Its professional values V1 and V2 are the more obvious connections to decolonising praxis, as they explicitly promote equality, diversity and inclusion. But V4 is also relevant as it requires participants to acknowledge the wider context around higher education, in which racial inequalities are now firmly evidenced and for which students and staff are demanding decolonising actions as part of institutional address. So V3 is also relevant here as it supports participants to engage with research and scholarship that evidences the above and to provide strategies and solutions for this. The decolonising lens can also be applied to the core knowledge criteria here on the left, to the subject material that teachers are teaching, K1, and the methods that they use to teach and assess this, K2. And as part of the decolonising praxis in education, it's important to pay attention to how and why students are learning or not learning within a specific subject area, which is K3, and to pay attention to the methods that we use to evaluate the effectiveness of our teaching, K5. So for me, there are opportunities within these professional standards for promoting decolonising praxis. And I feel confident in using these to support my decolonising approach, even though they do not mention the word. While some universities have shied away from the word decolonisation, University of Kent's 2021 anti-racism strategy explains that it is something it will pursue despite its contested nature. And the strategy includes actions for decolonising curricula. So the strategy serves as an institutional commitment and a prompt for all aspects of Kent curricula to be examined and evolved through a decolonising lens, including the PGC-HE curricula, which I'll now focus on. So the PGC-HE consists of 2 compulsory modules, which AFS participants also need to complete. That's a huge number of staff. That's the introduction to and the contextualising modules. There are also 4 optional modules, but only the PGC-HE participants need to complete these. And that's a module in assessment and feedback, an individual investigation module, a module on internationalisation of higher education, and the inclusive university module, which I convene. And I'll talk about that module first, as it provides the most obvious opportunities for decolonising praxis. The module was reaccredited last year, just before I started the job. And I was pleased to see when I inherited the module guide that the new module guide included readings by a diverse range of authors and sessions devoted to intersectionality, rethinking curricula, rethinking pedagogical practices. Aside from this, I've had a blank slate for developing the session materials. And as participants opt for this module, I have some confidence that they're coming to the module with a desire to critically interrogate key areas of inequality, as per university data and targets, but also according to their own experiences and observations as new teachers. Session 4 of this module is about rethinking the curriculum, and it's an opportunity for me to talk about work that I've done on decolonising the arts curriculum, as shown on some of the session slides here. It's also an opportunity to promote research that's produced by my colleagues at Kent on developing diversified curricula, decolonised curricula, and culturally sensitive curricula. So as shown here on the slide, that includes the University of Kent's Diversity Mark, which is an initiative led by the Student Success team. It includes referring to a staff student publication from 2020, edited by Thomas and Jivraj on decolonising the university. And it includes reference to the work by Thomas and Quinlan on the effects of culturally sensitive curricula on racially minoritized student engagement. I present the terms diversified, decolonised, and culturally sensitive here in a Venn diagram to indicate some of the overlaps. While decolonisation is distinct, with its geopolitical demands for repatriation, restitution, reparations, when it comes to decolonising education, overlaps with diversification and cultural sensitivity become apparent. In the book Towards Decolonising the University, Dr. Dave Thomas writes, to quote, "Decolonising education requires a decolonial transformation, organised and underscored by a critical race methodology and a social justice imperatives, in order to redress structural inequality in the academy. It requires a relationship with the past and an appetite to become a part of living history in order to de-link Eurocentrism from epistemic justice. It requires faculty and the institutions to proactively undergo the uncomfortable process of self-reflection," unquote. The diversity mark also calls for the faculty to proactively self-reflect as they develop diversified, culturally sensitive curricula. So that's one area of overlap. And Thomas and Quinlan's culturally sensitive curriculum scales are underscored by critical race methodology, another overlap with what Thomas is saying there in the Decolonising the University quote. This is the slide I use to present Thomas and Quinlan's culturally sensitive curriculum scales to the participant of my inclusivity module. The scales are grouped into 4 dimensions, and as mentioned, each are derived from critical race theory, and they support the aims of decolonising education as they move beyond representation to address the way in which racialised minorities are represented, and to ensure that curricula also enable students to develop critical consciousness and to challenge power. I encourage my participants of this module to use these scales to evaluate their own modules with their own students. But I've also used these scales in the session to find out how culturally sensitive participants have found the curricula of my module to be. In doing so, modelling to lecturers the professional standard K3 for how they are learning or not learning the subject of inclusive HE, and also modelling K5 in using Thomas and Quinlan scales as a method to evaluate my own teaching. This is the slide I use to prompt participants to rate my module content against each of the cultural sensitivity dimensions. And on doing this last autumn, the responses were really positive. The average ratings being around 4 out of 5 for the way in which diversity is represented, for positive portrayals in the module curricula, the way in which the module challenges power, and the way in which the module was promoting inclusive classroom interactions. So I am finding opportunities in the inclusive university module to promote decolonial practice, perhaps unsurprisingly. However, it's an optional module, only for PGCHE participants, not for AFES participants. So that's, it's not compulsory for all staff. So my attention has therefore been shifted more recently to the compulsory modules, in which more staff, in fact, all new staff, are required to participate. There have been opportunities with the compulsory module on contextualising higher education that's convened by Kathleen, who also is the co-author of the cultural sensitivity scales with Dave Thomas. This module was run 3 times this year, and I ran the first iteration in January. This gave Kathleen and I more time to further embed decolonising educational principles into the curriculum, with an emphasis on racial equity, inclusion, and belonging. In one session, we presented something known as the Equity-Minded Practice Syllabus Review Guide, very long title, from the Center of Urban Education, University of Southern California. And we asked participants to follow this guide to review curricula of their own modules within the session, which was really productive in itself. But following the success of using the cultural sensitivity scales to evaluate my other module, the inclusivity module, Kathleen and I decided to incorporate questions from the Equity-Minded Syllabus Review Guide into the end of module evaluation form for this particular module, for this compulsory module, again to model practice, and again to also know how equitable participants found our curriculum and teaching to be. Responses again were positive, with average ratings being just under 5 out of 5 for the questions asking whether the curriculum or within the module diverse participants were validated, whether the course materials represented the perspectives of people of colour, or whether the course materials questioned or deconstructed white experience as the norm. Everyone believed that, to a strong extent, the curriculum did. So far, we've had mainly positive responses to the decolonising changes we're making to the compulsory contextualising HE module and to the optional inclusivity module that I convene. But there are 3 specific challenges I'd like to speak about now. The first challenge is with the compulsory Introduction to module. Due to this being a long-running module with a reading list and slides that have evolved over many years by different conveners, which I inherited just before having to teach it last September, while recovering from COVID, meaning that I didn't have any time to revise the module and materials through a decolonising lens before delivery. I only had time for a few minor tweaks and then had to run with that, with the view to reviewing and revising this module before the next academic year, which I'm now in the midst of doing. And I'm using the same critical framework that I presented on the inclusivity module to review and rethink my curricula. And I've registered both the modules I'm convening for Kent's diversity mark. While I'm waiting for the collaborative diversity mark process to commence, I've been using Thomas and Quinlan's cultural sensitivity scales to self-reflect on both modules. And this has shown the introduction to module to be lacking, not only in terms of the representation of diversity, but in the positive portrayals and the challenging power, those particular dimensions. Now, module 8190 is designed to serve as an introduction to learning, teaching and the academic environment for new university lecturers. So as such, it intends to provide a foundational understanding of contemporary higher education, learning and teaching, theory and practice. And for the first of two assignments, the market criteria requires participants to demonstrate a clear understanding of principles of learning and teaching, a critical evaluation of those principles, an understanding of principles of assessment, and they need to cite suitable pedagogic literature. So participants need to be taught in a way that enables them to fulfil this criteria, naturally. However, as I've been reviewing the module materials, I see that they promote very much so a Euro or Western centric principles or an idea of learning and teaching, and maintain a canon of learning and teaching that's almost identical to that which I encountered when completing my PGC in 2006. The materials that I inherited included this map, which presents a range of learning theories. Some of you might have come across this. Theories and theorists in a helpful format. Interactive, it leads to Wikipedia pages. And at first glance, it appears very diverse. But on closer inspection, it only includes 3 authors that could be identified as non-Western or belonging to the global majority, which gives the impression that learning theory is white and Western, and doesn't place value on learning theories from other regions and other cultural traditions. And so my first challenge is in decolonising the learning and teaching theory canon, or SOTL, or the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning as it's otherwise known, so that I can promote diverse and empowering praxis to my module participants. And this is a challenge as the existing canon is pretty well established and dominates much of our trusted publications. As you may know, and I believe it's the subject of another BCU talk this coming month, the demand for more diverse knowledge is not necessarily served by the publishers we tend to rely upon. So we are often having to look to the margins, to platforms created by those who have been excluded from mainstream publication that aren't really respected and recognised by the academy. Vicious circle. But nevertheless, I'm starting to seek out proactively more diverse scholarship of teaching and learning now, and being more open-minded to different platforms through which they're published or expressed or recorded. But I was also pleased to find that although I didn't reference diverse sources on this particular module, the participants, when they gave in their submissions, they had independently researched and cited some really diverse and empowering authors for their assignments, which I will now be incorporating into next year's reading list as a form of curriculum co-production. The second challenge, as someone who works with teachers of many disciplines, is to find examples of decolonising praxis relevant to those disciplines. I'm from an arts background and have examples I can draw on for that, 5 participants teaching law, medicine, economics, astrophysics, sports science, the list goes on. Again, I'm finding some examples within the participant submissions. And in fact, at the Medway Teaching and Learning Conference in June this year, I've proposed to co-present with 4 participants from the Inclusive University module who wrote their assignments on decolonising the curricula in filmmaking, economics, chemistry and business. And the discussions that we've been having about this within and since the module are serving as another form of curriculum co-production. The last challenge to note is in making decolonial praxis unavoidable, which I mentioned at the start. It's a desire, but it's a challenge. And it's also a challenge to be able to promote decolonial praxis explicitly to colleagues and to enable them to have meaningful and rewarding opportunities for this. That's something I seek to do, but it continues to be a challenge. The optional Inclusive University module provides a clear opportunity for this for those who are doing the PGC and select that module. However, the learning outcomes for this module can technically be achieved without engaging with decolonial praxis, meaning that decolonial praxis could be avoided. And in fact, it was, as out of the 24 submissions for this module, only 5 looked at decolonising their curricula, and that was their choice. So that's a huge amount that decided not to bother with that subject area. Similarly, with the 2 compulsory modules that I've mentioned, participants can pass these modules without engaging with decolonial praxis. That's all PGC and AFS participants being able to avoid decolonial praxis. However, we have the power to change the learning outcomes when these modules are next reaccredited. In the meantime, opportunity, I feel, does exist in using the UK professional standards to recognise decolonial praxis in the way that I've already mentioned, although this can depend on the person assessing assignments, fellowship applications and teaching observations, as the standards are open to interpretation in respect of racial equity and decoloniality. For example, I might not pass a lecture on V2 if I see racially minoritized students are not actively included in classroom activities, but another person might pass them as they are judging participation in a different way or choosing not to see colour. Therefore, although there is opportunity here, ultimately, without race or coloniality being explicitly mentioned in the UK professional standards, they could still be achieved without engaging in decolonial praxis. No one likes being forced into things, especially academics, and autonomy is a key element of effective learning. But if all university lecturers are not obliged to develop decolonising praxis, how and why would they? And if they don't, then how will universities evolve to fully serve our increasingly diverse communities? Value needs to be added for all academics to want to develop a decolonising praxis, whether they agree with it or not ideologically. It needs to be something that serves their own interests. And it's around this that I feel that we can apply more learning from the critical race theory known as interest convergence that was purported by Derek Bell in 1980. I feel that's something we need to return back to. Kent has now embodied equality, diversity and inclusion into its probation and promotion processes, meaning that all staff have to demonstrate EDI practices to be able to stay and progress at the university. But EDI, as we've discussed in previous sessions in this lecture series, does not guarantee necessarily a decolonising praxis. But there is still opportunity here, I feel, as there are within the professional standards, to start making decolonial praxis harder to avoid. With this and the decolonising actions of the anti-racism strategy, I believe we have a good institutional foundation to work on at Kent. We just need to keep up the momentum in systematically evolving our curricula, our canons, our learning outcomes, our operational plans through a decolonising lens. And ultimately, I feel we need to do more to work together on this, as this is urgent, but it's not a competition. It shouldn't be a competition. So with that said, I very much welcome advice colleagues have here today on addressing the 3 challenges that I've outlined. and any other questions or comments you may have. Before I open up to discussion and have a look through the chat, just to say in my presentation, which I'll share with the organisers, there are some references that I've included today, but also some further reading and viewing that I've been collecting that I'm happy to share. But I'll move back onto that and have a look at the chat. Thank you.
Lucy, for that wonderful presentation. There doesn't seem to be anything in the chat. Does anybody have any questions to ask Lucy regarding her presentation today? Lots of claps for you, Lucy.
Thank you.
Are there any comments, questions, suggestions, anything you're doing similar at your institutions, or anything that you've taken away from today's presentation from Lucy? Any ideas that she's given you?
Yes. I'll put the reading list up in the chat there. I'll tell you what, Amrit, I'll put the readings straight into the chat so people can copy and paste it, so that people can see the challenges. I think
Okay,
someone just
Hi,
had their hand
Lucy.
up. Hi.
Yeah, hi, Lucy. It's Mushrat. I've got my hand up. I'll just put my hand down. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's going to help me with my work at my institution, because as much as we have a few sprinklings of opportunity, let me say, the challenges are quite enormous. But I think because I've been following what Kent's been doing because of my brother Dave, who's been doing the work.
Yes.
He's not literally my brother, but solidarity brother. But so it's interesting because although I agree, I also differ in from my viewpoint, being just a different person in a different context and institution. I feel one of the things is, I know this work is long haul, generative, but one of the things I really working on is getting that entrance convergence centered and loud and visible to the people in power, because they really do hold the resources, the money to make it work. As much as Ferrer says about the grassroots will show the people in power what they need to do, we can't really do it without them. And that's where I find the tension and the opposition greatest. I don't know how you've worked with Kent on that.
Yeah, that's so interesting, Mushrat, and I feel like I've had two very different experiences, because at Kent I feel like I've arrived after they've implemented a strategy, an anti-racism strategy, after they've employed more people in their student success team to devote work to this, after they've employed me, and in my job description it was specifically to focus on racial equality in the work I'm doing, which are things that I could only have dreamt of 8 years ago when I was at UAL. When I first started working in educational development at UAL, that was the stage where it was like, oh, how do we get institutional buy-in? How do we get the resources released? How do we get a commitment 8 years ago? So I feel like it was two different places I've been in. So I feel fortunate at Kent to have arrived where they've got the strategy and the policy and some of the resource devoted. The challenge I'm finding at Kent now is keeping that momentum and commitment and focus on race equity and decolonisation amidst all of the current, hoo-ha and tensions and, increasingly horrible climate to be doing this work, especially in Kent, where it's provincial. We're not in a metropolitan. In London, it felt like you didn't have to question it so much, although it took longer to get that institutional buy-in. When it did come, it just felt like the most, well, yes, of course we need to. We're in the capital, we're in the metropole, as people said yesterday, in the other lecture. So it's, two different situations. But I think, coming back to you highlighted there about interest convergence. Yeah, I always feel like you kind of always got to be thinking about, well, what's in it for them, and it's really cynical, but quite often it's okay, they want to keep their institutions afloat, they want to keep their really big pay packet, at the top. They want to make sure all their students are happy because it's good for business. And I think that sometimes we really need to pay attention to those things that make them happy, because we can't expect them to feel the same investment in this cause as we do, because the interests are different. Yeah, I could keep going on about that, but I can see there's some other hands raised. I don't know if someone else wanted to speak, and I'll start having a look at some of the things in the chat as well.
Yeah, we've got, is it Harshad? If you want to go ahead, please.
Hi, yeah. Hi, Lucy. Thank you very much for that. Really, really interesting, and loads that I've learned from that, to be honest. Lots of things I can take away and think about. I'm curious about something about your experience of this. I often find there is so much kind of depth and really important reflection and theoretical stuff in your work. And this bringing together of decolonial practice and critical race theory, and trying to develop a journey really that everyone can go on, so it enriches everyone's practice. And I'm curious to know what your experiences are when it comes to whiteness structures, because what I often observe is that as soon as critical race theory and anti-racism and decolonial practice it starts to get integrated into institutional take up, whiteness, a critique of whiteness as a fundamental colonial structure, which is inside every UK institution and globally, in the global north, certainly in westernized systems, that critique of whiteness disappears and seems to fall away. And then these terms about decoloniality and critical race theory and anti-racism, they get taken on by institutions as the thing that needs to be done because it's good for us. What's your kind of experience of focusing on the fact that whiteness critique needs to be part of that?
Firstly, totally. That is totally exactly, I think, yeah, reflects what I've seen and experienced as well. Like I've said, that avoidance, I think, operates at different levels. You might engage with the higher level term decoloniality, but yeah, like you say, as soon as it comes down to looking at particular groups within that and the unnamed whiteness, the elusive, yeah, it's a different story. From my experience in 2018, when we first did the first zine, which I co-curated with two fellow Asian colleagues, we really wanted to have, in the initial draft, the word white supremacy was written into the foreword, and then was then removed for the first zine in 2018. In subsequent publications and events, the word came back in. It was named, it was put out there, it was discussed. But in that initial putting out there, yeah, certain colleagues didn't want to have it there. It's too uncomfortable. And I felt so upset about that, and shocked, because I just didn't. To me, it just felt, no, but that's obvious. It's obvious. That's what we're dealing with, and I'm half white. I'm happy to deal with that, even though that implicates half of my family. But yeah, so it was a bit of a for me. And some of my initial reflective pieces that I wrote about were kind of me just recognizing, oh, wow, this is hard on so many levels for so many different people in the room for different reasons. And I think we need to stop and acknowledge that and see that everyone's on these, very difficult journeys. But that said, I think the work around white fragility, I think it's just really important for all of us to look at, to kind of understand that is part of this battle, is dealing with white fragility and insecurity, and a big shifting of a power imbalance, historical power balance, would have implications. So yeah, it's a really difficult one. I think for me, I try not to ever profess to be an expert, but to speak with feeling and with honesty, and if I can, draw on my own experience as being someone that's biracial, that kind of has a foot in both camps, to put it crudely. I find that can help sometimes, at least keep a conversation going and not be shut down. Yeah, thanks for the comment, Harsha. That's a good thing to be reflecting on.
No, great. Thank you, Lucy. Really enjoying your work, by the way. I've been following it for a while, so I'll continue with that. You're around the corner from me, by the way. I'm in Kent as well.
Ah, brilliant. Let's meet.
Let's meet. Thank you.
I'm
Questions or comments?
just looking through the thing to make sure I've not missed anything. Yeah, thanks for the comments there. I think practice is really important as well. And that's what Paulo Freire speaks a lot about in the Pedagogy of the Oppressed. 50 years ago, was promoting that idea of not just theorizing, not just practicing. We need to bring these things together. And I feel very strongly about that. And I think that's why I have not got a doctorate yet. And that's partly the reason. I just don't want to get lost completely in theory. I always want to make sure that what I'm doing is completely reflective and action rooted and leading to something that can be, as Musharat said, generative, something that keeps evolving and adapting with the people that we're working with. Julia, I'd be really happy to connect with you for the work you're doing in University of Glasgow. At one point in the last 6 months, I attempted and then stopped just because of other things I had to prioritise, but wanted to start a kind of network of educational developers that are wanting to decolonise our curriculum, because we share this canon, and we're all trying to probably do the similar work. So that's something I might still initiate, or if you're aware of something, Julia, if we might just connect with people on an informal basis, I think that'd be really valuable. Peter, could I please develop my critique of SOTL? Surely there is support for decolonising within the SOTL community. At least there is in Hearts. Peter, I'd be really happy to know about what's happening at Hearts. Please do connect with me if you can. That term SOTL is actually only something that I've come across since I joined Kent. UEA, we never used that word. We used educational development or teaching and learning theory. So now that I know that there's an acronym and there's a whole community, I'm now discovering some stuff. I'm like, okay, there does seem to be an appetite, and there does already seem to be some good work being done. In particular in the US, I've noticed, more integration of Indigenous perspectives. So that's good, but literally I only feel like I'm discovering that now. So if anyone's got any more tips on that, please say. I can see someone's got their hand up. Would you like to come in?
Hi there. Thank you, Lucy. Really insightful presentation and some interesting points made by everyone. So I don't work in academia. My day job is in consulting, professional services, but my research is focused on the intersectionalities of people within workplaces and contextualized from a Now, I'd just like to kind of get your view on if we take this up a level from the wider picture of capitalism and kind of the racialization of that, and how decolonizing that would fit into decolonizing an institution rather than just higher education. So if we just take it up a level, that I'd be really interested in your view on that.
That's really refreshing, Amrit. This is why it's great, isn't it? Just getting out of our little boxes, because we can learn so much from each other. I do sometimes think, and I don't know if other colleagues who are in the academy here, we think we're in something unique, and then, yeah, there are distinct elements, but ultimately we are businesses and institutions with what's it called, human resource policies and management practices that are no different. Perhaps, and we've got a lot to learn from other institutions and organizational development processes, that because I have sometimes thought, when I speak to friends that aren't in the academy, that are working for charities, in the corporate world, in finance, and I tell them about what I'm doing, they're quite often really au fait with their EDI policies in a way that I don't often see with colleagues in the academy. And I think, they're doing something differently. Not necessarily better, because we don't necessarily know the outcomes, but they are doing things differently elsewhere. Got so much to learn from. So yeah, that would be, I think, so important to look at, Amrit. And I think with the point you just raised there about racialized capitalism in particular, considering, you know, we are a business charging a huge amount of money to people from different countries who come because of this appetite that was created by the European colonialism, you know, of our education being the best and you're going to pay loads more money for it. Loads there to learn. Yeah, I'd be really happy to talk to you some more about that. And if you've got any further thoughts on that now that I've spouted mine.
Great, thank you, Lucy. Let's connect.
Please. Making some notes of names. I am on LinkedIn. If you want to connect with me on there, outside of institutional, yeah, things, platforms. Right, let's carry on going. I think, is there any other hands up? Book White Benevolence by Amanda Gerbard and Al. Thank you. And another book there on critical whiteness practice. This is fantastic. Keep them coming. I'll make a note of that. I haven't come across those two. There's so much to read. And good, Julia, that you're already in contact with my colleagues and you're flagging Kent's work. It's great.
Marshall has got his hand up again.
Thank you. And I'm just reading your comment, Harshad, about academics, yeah, at the stage with work frames. Yeah, did you want to come in?
I just say.
Oh no, is it?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, can I just say
sorry.
there's just a few minutes left of the presentation, so we do need to wrap things up. But yes, go ahead, Harshad.
Sorry, no, I don't want to take up any more time, but yeah, no, I just think it's a way forward, isn't it? Grabbing people whilst they're learning about teaching and learning and trying to get them into that frame of thinking. So no, I completely support it. I think that is the way to both dismantle and reassemble, because I think that's what we're talking about. And the point that Amrit made about racial capitalism, you know, I just think I was gonna ask a question, but we can talk about it some other time about learning and teaching in the wider context of racial capitalism and neoliberal universities. I just think it's so important that new academics and people getting into the PGCE, etc., are really aware of it. But no, I won't take up any more time. Thank you.
Well, thanks for that. And I feel like I don't know if there was. I feel like in all the ones I've attended so far, I know with Gunarm's talk and someone else's talk, I think the first talk, it keeps coming up, you know, about racialized capitalism. So it'd be kind of, yeah, good to see more sort of insights and devotion to that, because I know there's something I don't feel that confident approaching, because I feel like it's well out of my comfort zone, like geopolitics and economics. But that's, again, an interdisciplinary approach to that would, again, be really helpful. And thank you, everyone, for your comments. I think a lot of these aren't questions, they're just really interesting comments. And Ashley from the Netherlands, yes, please do stay in touch. I'll make a note of your name. Would really welcome a connection with you there. Different context to compare. I'm sure we've got things to learn. May I connect regarding the design of the new module with your SMT, Florence? Yeah, please do. Feel free to connect, Florence. Be happy to be in touch. Yeah, thank you. I think I've got to the end of the chat.
That's come to the end of the presentation today. Thank you so much, Lucy, for your insights on the topic. And thank you for everybody attending and all your questions and comments. And as Lucy said, do connect with her and each other to continue this community of practice into this topic. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Bye.